Alright, so we're doing a tier list. Let's see what we have here. So there's obviously three best decks of the format. Let's get that out the way. Branded, Kashtira, and Labyrinth. I feel like all three of these decks are the best decks of the format. They all serve a purpose. Kashtira is more of the kind of like control deck that can like sort of combo as well. Same thing with Branded, it can control and combo. They're both like kind of good, but in different ways. You have the explosion plays with Branded. You have the lock zone play with the Cashier deck. If not, you're playing the Arise Heart Pass with the preparations, which is also really good. And as well as having stuff like Book of Moon and Forbidden Chalice, Forbidden Lance, which is like really good. And then you have Labyrinth. Labyrinth is your trap deck of the format, the best trap deck. I don't think any other trap deck comes close to Labyrinth. Being able to set all of these different trap cards like Eradicator, D-Barrier are just really, really insane in the format. So all three of these decks serve a purpose in the format, and they are good at what they do. Let's go to some more decks. I think in the tier 2 section, I believe that Naturia is definitely the tier 2 deck. I think Naturia or Runic is a very, very solid deck because it utilizes the Runic cards the best. I feel like maybe even Sprite, but I'm not too sure about Sprite right now, so I'm going to keep that there. I think that potentially there's another tier 2 deck here. I'm not sure, actually. There could be another potentially tier 2. I think Rika is slept on a lot, but I think right now the only tier 2 deck I believe, maybe even Sprite. Let's just say Sprite. I think Sprite and Naturia are the two best decks that could utilize the runic cards, and they both set up like really good boards because you have to deal with not only the runic cards, but you also have to deal with, if you're dealing with Naturias, you have to deal with Baron, the Naturia Beast. You have to deal with the Naturia Barkion if you're playing the trap deck. So like, it's really good at what it does. When it comes to like utilizing the runics, as well as the sprite deck, you have IP, you still have Sprint, you have Gigantic, which is really good against a lot of the players that are using Nib. So unless you have Imperm or Veiler, having stuff like that is like really, really good. I didn't think sprite cards, like losing Elf is just such a big hit to the deck. I'm not too sure about this. It could be in a tier 3, the top of tier 3, but like I think for right now, Sprite it's just too good not to rate it this high. I think next up we have, let's just say, I think Marine Cess is the best deck that can play hand traps. I think a lot of other people like compare it to Mathmech. I think both of these arguably are the two best decks that can play a lot of hand traps. They can like have a like one or two like card combos to like clear your opponent's board either with access code and OTK, or with Marine Cess you have the Zelandis play that can clear their board and set up, one to two negates. That is just really solid, and that's really good going second because most of the time you're breaking their board and you don't really have much. But like Marine Cess does have stuff like Wave. Wave is an insane card, as well as the Circular. So they both serve their purposes. I just think that Marine Cess is a little bit better. Maybe it's a little bit biased, but that's just my opinions. Another deck that is really good with utility cards is Sword Soul. Sword Soul is definitely a really solid deck. I think all three of these decks could be like potentially the bottom of tier 2 or the top of tier 3, but they also have that purpose of like having like 12 to maybe even 15 going second cards, and then having their engine be really solid. I think all of these decks just serve that purposes. So they're all really good. I think another deck that is really good is Traptrix. Traptrix is a really good solid tier 3 deck. I think that it just pales like compare it to something like Labyrinth, because I think Labyrinth just does way more. Again, setting like the Eradicator or D-Barrier is just way better than having the combo Trap Tricks build that just loses to Nib, which a lot of people are still on. So Trap Tricks is definitely a really solid deck. I think its recursion is really solid. It has protection in the green Triptychs, the new one. I can't really think of the name, but you have a lot of combos. You have the trap cards, which are really hard to play around if you don't have stuff like Runic Destruction or like Lightning Storm or heavy Harpy's Feather Duster. So this deck is like really solid. I just don't think it's that good when it comes to comparing it to all of these other decks that are in the higher tiers, which is like okay. And again, it does compare to the Labyrinth deck since they're both trap decks. Another deck that I think is tier 3, I think Rika, Plunder, yeah, maybe even Flunderies. I think all three of these decks have that they're really good engines. They have really, really solid engines, but I think that they're a little bit worse than these other four decks. Because the problem with Rika is Rika's a little bit fragile to hand traps. Like an Ash on the Sowing can be really problematic. Nibiru can be pretty problematic sometimes. It's just like Imperm can be problematic sometimes. Sometimes you can play through a lot of disruptions, which is like really solid. But it could also struggle going second. Like if they stop your Sunseed, uh, it's really hard to play. Like the Rikas are really good, but it's only really good when you're playing with this the Sun Avalon cards. So it's just kind of hard. Plunder is the same thing. Like you have a good amount of like going second cards, but if you're like outpaced by something like Kashtira, which is a better control deck, or like Labyrinth, or even Branded, it could be pretty tough. But if you're like in the lead, you keep that lead with something like Plunder. Same thing with Flunderies. If you go first, you set up your board. It's pretty hard to break, even without the barrier statue. I think the trap card is really really solid. And don't forget, this engine is really good. All three of these decks, once they get their deck rolling, it's really hard to beat. It's really hard to beat. Compared to like these decks, like you could break through these boards like pretty solid. They relied so heavily on their non-engine, but like these decks, they rely heavily on their engine. So like if you stop their engine, I mean, hypothetically, like with any deck, if you stop their engine, uh, like you win. But like like they really fold if you stop their engine. Which is like, because they don't really have like I guess the Sun Avalon, they're one card combos. You have one card combos with Flunderies and Plunders as well, but it's just really hard to play once you like stop a specific card in the engine, which is why they're in like the bottom tier 3. And then the more roguish options, I think that Dark World is definitely a really good rogue option. It's just the thing that like Kashtira having a Macrocosmos is just really hard, and sometimes you get like really clunky hands with like little to like no danger. Sometimes you just hit too many dangers, you don't have enough engine. Sometimes you just lose to like an Ash or an Imperm sometimes, or like, but like once this deck gets rolling, which is like the same thing with these other three decks, which is Rika, Plunder, and like Flunder. Once you get rolling, the deck is just unstoppable. Like it doesn't matter if you have Nib, it doesn't matter if you have an Ash Blossom, Imperm. Once you get your deck rolling, and you're hitting a Snow off of the Danger, you're hitting like a Jackalope and whatever. You just start snowballing into so much. But like it's just too gimmicky, especially with people like siding Shifter. Um, it had a decent like Labyrinth matchup. I think Labyrinth is like the best matchup, but like when you have stuff like Expulsion, it's like really hard because this deck doesn't play that many engine. It doesn't play that many hand traps to stop people's engines. So like when they have stuff like the Lock 5 zones, it's like really hard unless you draw like Lava Golem. And if they Expulsion you, you just lose. So like Dark World is definitely in a not in the best spot. It's not in the worst spot either. Same thing with like Scareclaw. Scareclaw is another deck that like it has the Brave engine. It's like one of the better decks with the Brave. I think Plunder is like the best maybe. In combination with like something like maybe a Sprite is good. Even Kashtira is using it. But like Scareclaw, it's just I don't know what the deck is missing. It's just missing something. It's Tryhard is just not enough. Like a Towers monster is just not really good. You could also say Ignister is in the same category. I pretty much put like Mathmech and Ad Ignister in the same like category because they're pretty much the same deck. Same thing with Marine Cess. They're all like Cyber's deck. So hypothetically, you could put Adignista here, but I think like Marine Cess and Mathmech is better. But like again, with the Towers cards, it's kind of hard. I mean, as an OTK deck, it's pretty solid. But like again, like dealing with like Eradicator and with Cashier, you have the Lock 5 Zone, Eruption, or Explosion, I meant. It's just really hard to go second with this deck, and then going first, this deck doesn't put up impressive boards. At least not as good as some like the other like top 5 decks in the format. They don't really put that much of a good board, so it's just hard to say with this deck. Um, Ninjas is another really solid deck. It's a deck that can play a lot of the utility cards, but I just think it's something is missing. Like it's really hard. Uh, if they like you have all this engine or really good engine and all this non-engine, but again, it's kind of like Rika and Plunder and Flunderies. If they stop your engine early on and you don't have like a follow-up, it's like really hard. But if you get into like a really grindy game, you're almost always winning with ninjas. It's just like that first or second turn. We have like a deck that just relies on flip monsters. It's just kind of hard to win, basically. But who knows? Maybe this could move up tier. I think this could potentially be like top of tier, like the middle of tier 3, maybe even like the top of tier 3 at best. But I just don't think it's like that good. I think it's a little bit better than Scareclaw, to be honest. And then I think Madolche is not terrible. I just don't think it has like a good matchup against any of the top tier decks, which I think it's like at the bottom of like rogue tier. Same thing like with like Gishkis. It just pales compares to like all of these decks. It sets up a good board. It's decent. It's still really good with the sprite cards. It's just really clunky. You can get really like bad hands that just only has Gishki cards or only has sprite cards, and then it's not that great. It's just not great at all. Because you don't even play that many hand traps. You play like 9 maximum, maybe 10 going second cards, and just these decks do it better. And like they set up their like 2 or 3 negates. Like they're just way better. And then we have Rockets. I think Rockets and Makenko. Um, honestly, these are all trash tier. Honestly, um, I think tier is like the best of the 3. I think tier there's just not a defined deck, and the deck can't really play a lot of going second cards. It doesn't set up like an insane board. It sets up like a mediocre board. Um, it has a really bad Kashtira matchup going first and second because they probably side into Shifter, loses to Expulsion. Labyrinth is like a decent matchup, I guess, but they have D barrier. It's just not a good deck. Same thing with like Dragon Link. Kashtira just rips the Striker Dragon, which is like really decent. And then if they rip 2 cards, they hit Striker Dragon and like another card that's also really bad. So like you have to do like Expulsion. Yes, you could play like a lot of hand traps in this deck, but then like Marine Cess and Mathmech and Sword Soul and Attic Nister, they just do it better. There's just not really anything. And same thing with Makenko. Like Dark Road is just a better combo deck if you want to go all in. Um, Castera, same thing. Like Brandis, same thing. It's just a better combo deck. I even think Gishki's is just a little bit better than Makenko's in a sense. Same thing with the Madolche Vernalis deck. I think it's just way better. Sets up a really, really solid board as well. You could play the Barrier Statue and set up a board with like Last Souffle and Fenrir, because Fenrir is also an Earth that comes well with the Vernalis cards. So I just think the Makenko, Rocket, and tier deck, they're worse than the tier decks. The tier 3 decks. They're just not that good. So that's my tier list. I think this is pretty solid. Not too much to say, honestly. There's probably a few decks that I'm missing here that's like rogue. Like ABC is like a deck that could be good. It's not really. Galaxies is a new deck. Not really that good. Generators is another deck. That got support, but it's not really that good. Springans is like missing an engine deck. Therion's is a deck that I didn't cover here, but Therion is more of an engine. It's hard to like say what is like the solidified Therion deck besides like maybe ABC, and like ABC is like at the bottom of Rogue tier, maybe even Trash tier, but like it's just another one of those combo decks. Like like everything else is like there's not really anything better than Marine Cess and Mathmech when it comes to like or Sword Soul when it comes to like a bunch of hand traps and a bunch of utility cards and like your engine it just keeps rolling. There's not really anything that like any like these combo slash control decks. There's not really anything better than that. Labyrinth as well. There's not like a better trap deck like Eldritch. It's like decent, but it's just not great, especially when there's a Macrocosmos card that can just banish your Eldritch cards, just runic cards in the format that can banish your Golden Lords. It's just not in a good spot right now. So overall, I think this is a pretty solid tier list. Let me know what you guys think about this in the comment section below, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.